But first, Ukrainian civilians spent another day fearing rockets from the sky. Russia unleashed a second barrage on multiple cities Tuesday, cratering homes and critical energy infrastructure. A dozen rockets struck the city of Zaporizhia, killing at least one person. The area is home to the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. It was the second series of mass strikes in as many days on Monday. Russian forces launched more than 80 missiles, killing at least 19 people and injuring more than 100. For more, I want to bring in Ambassador Daniel Fried. He's the former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and a former U.S. ambassador to Poland. He's also a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council. Ambassador Fried, the G7 leaders held an emergency virtual meeting on Tuesday to discuss this latest turn in the war. How much does a meeting like that really accomplish?
It accomplishes a lot if it goes badly. That's a lot of bad things. This meeting went well. Putin is counting on the will of the United States and Europe, of the democracies, to crumble as he kills Ukrainian civilians because he's losing his war. But the G7 held firm. They said they will keep supporting Ukraine as long as it takes. Putin, like Hitler in the 20th century, underestimates the strength, the resilience of democracies.
But so they did, as you say they would stand firmly. But there are tensions. I mean, there are in each of the individual countries, there are businesses that want to know when this war is over. Energy prices are higher. Walk us through some of those tensions that are being overcome in order to keep the coalition together.
Those tensions are real. In European countries, in the United States, there are forces on the left, but particularly on the right, the hard right, who side more or less with Putin or think it's none of our business. They were called the isolationists, some of whom were pro-fascist in the run-up to World War II, who thought World War II and Hitler's aggression in Europe was none of our business. Striking parallel. But Putin's atrocities and Ukrainian resistance has strengthened the resolve of those majorities in all of these countries that support backing Ukraine. Those majorities are solid, stronger than many anticipated. The Russian atrocities and Ukrainian resistance will continue to fuel support in the West for Ukraine. I'm glad of it. Doesn't mean we can take it for granted. But so far, that support has been more solid than Putin and many skeptics anticipated.
One of the things...
Don't count out democracies.
Don't count out democracies. One of the things we're learning are what the new lines are of these old alliances that you mentioned. You went back to World War II. Some people had thought they had frayed, that they had weakened. In terms of one of those international groups, Putin had met today with the UN nuclear watchdog on Tuesday. And so on the one hand, he's denying a lot of the norms and guardrails of the post-World War II era, and yet he's meeting with the head of the UN nuclear division. What do you make of that?
I would regard Putin's meeting with the utmost skepticism. I think he is cynically trying to appear responsible while actually being the source of all the nuclear problems, both the Ukrainian Zaporizhia nuclear plant, one of the largest in Europe, and the threat of using nuclear weapons against Ukraine. That's all on Putin. He knows it. We know it. He knows we know it. He is simply toying with the UN, trying to see whether he can drive wedges. I think the head of the IAEA is doing what he has to do. That is, trying to get the best deal possible to avoid a nuclear catastrophe at Zaporizhia. I doubt he is fooled by Putin. I think he knows. I think Mr. Grossi knows perfectly well where the responsibility lies. But Putin is playing at being responsible while being most dangerous.
Finally, Ambassador, as we think through what it means to stand firm and how long both the U.S. and the allies who stand with Ukraine will continue to stand with Ukraine, help me understand what the end of this conflict will look like, because the U.S. has said it will follow Ukraine's lead and that it will basically let Ukraine decide what the terms of any possible end of this invasion are. But the U.S. has its own interests that are separate from Ukraine. So how do those two diverge, and where do you see them possibly diverging?
I think the Biden administration has wisely never ruled out diplomacy and negotiations to end this war. I think that's the right call. But there's a bad history of the U.S. negotiating with Moscow over the heads of countries in Central and Eastern Europe. Roosevelt did that a little bit at Yalta, and we regretted it ever since. Even Roosevelt regretted it before he died. We do have overlapping interests with Ukraine, not identical ones, but it is not in our American interest to push Ukraine into surrendering its people or its land to a Russian aggressor. Where does that end? If we, out of fear of Putin's threat of nuclear war, force Ukraine to surrender, aren't we setting a precedent we'll come to regret? We don't want a war. And if we stand firm, but not panicky, we have the best chance of Ukraine's success without a war, which is our objective. It's tricky. It's nasty business. My colleagues in government, I've been at this for many months. They're tired, but their policy is a reasonable one. And I think that President Biden has done a good job so far. Harder tests await us all, I fear.
Well, and I've run out of time, but Ambassador, I got to ask you one more question, which is administration officials tell us that basically they've sent the message to Russia: if you mess with any tactical nuclear weapons, you will pay. You will suffer a serious blow. How does that? You've communicated messages like that. How do the Russians know that the U.S. is for real when they make those threats?
We don't know that they know we're for real, but the Russians, particularly the Russian military, understands that they understand the difference between the United States giving talking points and the United States issuing serious warnings, one power to another. I think we're in that space. The administration has been disciplined, not leaking what it is exactly telling the Russians. The consequences will be. But they're right to warn the Russians. And you better believe that my guess is over weekends, the senior NSC staff and Defense Department, State Department, Treasury Department staff are running scenarios for what we do if Putin does decide to use nuclear weapons. I don't think he will, okay? But if I were in government, I'd be preparing for all eventualities, likely or not.
Okay, Ambassador Daniel Fried, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.